And I see our next panel has arrived by Zoom. And so we'll just proceed. Our first speaker is with the Students' Union of Vancouver Community College, Hemveer Singh. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I want to start with acknowledging that I am currently situated on the territory of Naskos Commission's Legislature Nation, and I have the privilege to live, learn, and work on these unceded lands. We appreciate the community's support for students and the acknowledgement of how difficult it has been for students in COVID-19. We are hopeful that this year's budget consultation will result in further advances to the affordability and accessibility of post-secondary education in British Columbia. My name is Hemveer Singh, and I am the chairperson of Students' Union of Vancouver Community College, Local 16 of British Columbia Federation of Students. I'm an international student in automotive trade programs. The SEVCC, along with BCFS, recommends the full review of funding in the advanced education and skills training sector to be conducted to determine the gaps in government funding for regional colleges and universities, including the infusion of $200 million annually. Also, that the government freeze the tuition fee and develop a plan to progressively reduce the tuition fee at public institutions to lessen the financial burden on students and their families. And the government strengthen the tuition fee limit policy to ensure that the institutions are not increasing fees beyond their prescribed limits in the form of new ancillary fees and repacked programs. The BC government has made 3 commitments to the people of BC to make BC more affordable, to deliver services people count on, and to build strong, innovative economy that works for everyone. All 3 commitments can be met through the investment and improvement in the BC public post-secondary system. A review of per-student funding in BC tells a concerning story about the provincial government's commitment to strengthening universities and colleges. The 2021 budget includes an increase in the funding to the Ministry of Education and Skills Training over what was budgeted last year. While this represents an important step forward, but it does not make up for the decades of public disinvestment. Programs like the one offered at VCC are constantly changing, adjusting, or being recreated to fit the labor market demands and the government mandates. Because of the fast-paced changes the institutions are experiencing, they are forced to use tuition fee to balance their budgets. In addition to the labor market demands, places like VCC needs to meet the requirement of ministry and avoid deficits. The block funding model leads institutions to commonly collapse program, adjust them slightly, all just to reset the program with a different name at a higher cost to its students. This is not unique to VCC and is something students across the province experience every year. Pandemic has highlighted these shortfalls, and places like VCC disproportionately suffered from these losses. I came to VCC because it was the only program available to international students in British Columbia. I now understand the limited option I had were because of the years of underfunding combined with the limited funding model. This disproportionately impacts schools like VCC that are building communities for international students. The funding model that exists forces institutions to offer what is affordable to their business plans. That usually discludes trades and puts places like VCC in a situation where they must choose to charge high tuition to be able to recover the cost of diverse programming. The per-student funding model makes it unaffordable for institutions to run high-cost programs like upskilling and trades. With the decrease in funding that is happening simultaneously with the block funding model, institutions will be forced to no longer offer diverse programming. I didn't come to VCC because of my first choice. I came here because it was my only choice. As the government grapples with the economic recovery and works to reduce unemployment rate, educating and reskilling workers is vital investment. The pandemic has proved an opportunity for us to recognize the gap in various sectors that are key not only to economic growth and stability, but also with public health. To speed economic recovery in the province, we now see the additional targeted funding in the key areas such as right skilled trades, health, graduate education, and research can aid in the recovery we need. The necessary training offered in various regions of the province will help people get back to the places they live. It starts with equitable government investment into trades and health sciences of tomorrow. As it stands, the funding structure impacts career most vulnerable to recovery. COVID has offered us the opportunity to improve the current reality and offer a new, stronger British Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Hemveer. And now we'll hear from Ishikia Tripathi. I hope I've pronounced that properly.
Hi, so my name is Ishika Tripathi. I am the external representative at Emily Carr Student Union. I'm also sitting on the University Senate starting in fall. I'm a third year animation student. I ended up at Emily Carr as a transition through a trades training program at my high school in Surrey. This was an incredibly effective program as 17 out of 18 of my peers who did the program are now studying at Emily Carr. I chose my major because I love watching movies as a kid and I really wanted to be the one making them one day. I hope to work for Sony one day, and I was really excited to come to Emily Carr, but I find that the reality of the university is struggling to meet my expectations. Emily Carr suffers from a chronic deficit situation that threatens operations into the future. One of the first things I learned when I joined Students' Union was about my university's $7 million annual operating budget shortfall. The result of this deficit on campus is the sense of if only. If only the university had adequate funding to meet its core operations, then the possibilities expand. I also ask, what are some of the other consequences of the ongoing structural deficit? Emily Carr University has a privilege of relying on its reputation, the reputation that means being able to attract the best faculty, solicit funding for student awards and scholarships, and assist new graduates to secure great jobs. As the narrative continues to grow that Emily Carr University suffers from a funding shortage, that reputation also starts to erode. Instead, the excellent reputation of Emily Carr as an international art and design university is replaced with a new narrative of underfunding. One where the university has an over-reliance on underpaid, precarious sessional facility. We believe the success of Emily Carr graduates can be BC's successes. I know of graduates, Jason Saw as one example, who is working in BC's booming film and VFX industry and has recently won an Emmy with his team for his work on the show The Dragon Prince. Being the only specialized art and design university in the province is pretty neat. It's quite unbelievable to be surrounded by such talented colleagues. In the time of pandemic anxiety and uncertainty, current and future students are the forefront of cultural production, decolonization, and community building initiatives. Our school is a hub of innovation opportunity. Think about all the things that brought joy to you and your families over the pandemic: movies, TV shows, video games, magazines, podcasts, music, live stream theater, and more. This is the work of the creative sector. This is the work that keeps spirit alive in times of strife. My recommendation to you is to recognize the critical role of post-secondary education in rebuilding through COVID. Our institution, if adequately funded, can continue to bring incredible value to BC's economic recovery. We echo the British Columbia Federation of Students and our colleagues on this panel as we identify that post-secondary sector is in urgent need of a review of the funding system for institutions and an annual increase of $200 million. Additionally, targeted funding to our university, to Art and Design University, invests in new ideas needed to solve the province's wicked problems. Emily Carr continues to suffer from chronic underfunding due to its designation as a teaching university and not a research university. Changing this designation would enable additional funding that would help alleviate the current crisis. We also ask that this review result in the funding of the domestic students in master's program who are currently not funded on a per student basis by the government. I believe in the return on investment through an increase to operating funding to Emily Carr University and an investment in the creativity of BC. There is a great potential for leadership and innovation in sustainability and clean economy. BC's growing creative economy, entrepreneurship, decolonization, cultural production and preservation, and community leadership and organizing. Disney is coming to the region, and our animation graduates will climb to the artistic leadership ranks. I'm reiterating the comments of my colleagues on this panel that increased investment in post-secondary education is desperately needed to support the growth and potential of our province to get us through this pandemic. I ask, what other ideas and solutions are still in their early stages taking shape through the brilliant minds of BC's only specialized art and design school? And what else can we provide to the province if well supported? Without this needed support, we are watching the potential slip away. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashikia. And next we'll hear from Carissa Wilson.
Awesome, thank you so much. My name is Carissa and I'm the Executive Director with North Island Students Union, representing all students at North Island College. We are Local 15 of the British Columbia Federation of Students. Of the 25 public post-secondaries, NIC's catchment area is the largest and serves a broad range of students, including over 35 distinct First Nations, including the Comox Nations, from where I'm speaking to you from today. With offices in Port Hardy, Port Alberni, and Campbell River, our union aims to provide meaningful services, connections, and advocacy for all members and have been doing so since 1991. The BC government made 3 key commitments to the people of BC: to make BC more affordable, to deliver services people can count on, and to build a strong, innovative economy that works for everyone. All 3 commitments can be met through investment and improvement to the BC public post-secondary system. In order to follow through on these commitments, a full funding review for public post-secondary is necessary, with special focus on regional colleges. Colleges like NIC and the other institutions represented by the 5 folks on today's panel are acutely affected by the current funding model, which often consists of one-time funding. Funding in these blocks makes planning challenging for small institutions and has deep impacts on enrollment. Programs offered, advertised one year, spark interest, and then aren't offered again. Block funding also leads to higher rate of sessional instructors. Sessional instructors are often precariously employed, which leads to less engagement with the college community, shorting the important learning that happens outside the classroom. Many institutions were asking for this funding review well before COVID-19 began to play havoc on our lives. With so much change in the labor force, institutions like the one speaking today are tasked with re-educating these workers displaced by the pandemic. The folks speaking to you today all represent trades training, which again are often block or one-time funded, making planning year in and year out a challenge. In many communities, colleges are the entry point for education. When potential students face barriers to their entry, they may not complete their registration, and they may not make it to that important first day of their education. Over the past several decades, funding has dropped for public post-secondary, forcing institutions to rely more and more on tuition. This has placed undue pressure on students. North Island Students Union recommends that tuition face a freeze in the coming year, and that during that time, the tuition limit policy be reviewed. We recommend including international students in the tuition limit to protect this valuable contribution to our economy and our schools. When international student tuition is relied upon heavily to cover shortfalls in overall funding, we see tuitions rise at unpredictable amounts. Our studies show 47% of international students are economically vulnerable, and financial insecurity weighs heavy on emotional health. We recommend a review of the International Student Plan with increases for supporting and integrating into BC's social fabric. By including international students in the tuition limit policy, these valuable members of our economy can begin to feel valued and will continue to contribute to BC's tax base, which recent figures report as $218 million in direct income tax contributions. International students are BC's 3rd largest export, only after our precious lumber and minerals. To protect this integral part of our economy, we must plan and support their place in our province. I want to applaud this government for the return to compulsory trades programs. When trades were removed from compulsory status years ago, apprentice completion rates dropped dramatically, and many places became precarious. With trades training in each community NICU represents, we ask that further supports for trade students are planned, including increased support for apprenticeship completion. These valuable workers are key to rebuilding BC's economy. Previously, trade students had access to an on-campus apprenticeship counselors, a vital tool in supporting students throughout their years of education. When learners feel valued, we see completion rates rise. Many trades programs run independent of academic scheduling, and their access to on-campus and community supports are just as staggered as their start dates. By supporting apprentice counseling, we can return to valuing this important sector of BC's economy. One final ask starts with more applause, with the return of the BC grant system. Supporting students early again increases the likelihood of completion of education. Many students were underemployed throughout the last year, unable to work towards important savings to carry them throughout the school year. Now, more than ever, increased funding in the existing grant programs will support BC's economic rebuild. We ask for $100 million annually for this important program, increasing support for learners upfront when they need it. I'm really thankful for the opportunity to speak to the panel today. I look forward to any questions, and I look forward to the work as this committee continues. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carissa. Now we'll hear from Puneet.
Thank you for the opportunity to present to the committee today. I am External Executive of Camosun College Student Society and represent 9,000 health, trade, university, transfer, and other students at Camosun College, which incidentally is only a few kilometers away from BC Legislature. Last fiscal year, Camosun ran a deficit about 7 million and will likely to run another similar deficit this year. For any college, even a medium-sized post-secondary institution, this is a lot of money. COVID-19 has only worsened an existing structural program in the funding of colleges and similar teaching institutions. We realize that there are multiple competing priorities, but community-based institutions continue to be underfunded. Camosun College ran a deficit, but the deficit is drawing down the very limited fiscal reserves of the institution. With an uncertain situation, there is a real risk that smaller institutions will require significant government assistance in subsequent years. We call upon this committee to recommend a fair funding formula for colleges and smaller institutions, as well as direct COVID-19 related funding to offset the pandemic deficits. Additionally, I'm sure that the dire housing situation facing students in Victoria area has not escaped your notice. Those who have managed to find housing are often paying way too much, and others have had to make hard choices in terms of the distance from the campus and the quality of their accommodation. There are desperate students still struggling to get housing, a semester that starts in 8 days. Some students are seeking a deferral, while others are arriving in a town with no place to stay. Camosun College needs to have student housing on both its campuses. Similar institutions simply do not have the same fiscal capacity as the big universities and lack the funds to be able to undertake housing projects, even with the partial government funding. Having more students in residence makes it easier for other community members to find homes in the area with very tight housing markets. We call upon this committee to strongly recommend that the budget includes dedicated funding to fully fund the construction of student housing at the colleges and at least affluent post-secondary institution. I happen to be an international student and the first international student to be the senior elected officer of my student union. It was only after I arrived here that I realized how post-secondary institutions rely on the high tuition fees that I and my fellow international students must pay. Many of the large COVID deficits being run by post-secondary institutions in British Columbia are directly related to international student tuition fee revenue. International students make important contributions and fill the major gaps in the labor market. We also work the only workers in the province who must pay the double premium for healthcare, and we also live in the fear of the institution suddenly increasing our tuition fees. We ask this committee also strongly recommend regulation on the international student fees in the British Columbia and to recognize that there needs to be a fairness for international students. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the committee today. I'm looking forward for questions and any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Puneet. I'll now open it up to the floor for questions from the committee. Pam.
Yes, it's to Ishikia, is that right? Ishika? Ishika? Ishika. Sorry, I was putting in an extra. I have a question for you. You said that there was a $7 million shortfall, and I was wondering if you could tell me what kind of impact that has on a student, daily or for the year? What does this mean? So that it actually represents, if you could just give us a little bit of a story so that it's not just a number, but I need to understand how the impact, if you could, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as an animation student, we have a big problem about how our instructors are. So, if you miss a class that's in fall, you have to wait a whole year to take it again. And with the sessional thing, there's this big issue of how students don't exactly have the proper time, and how not all of the students can take it at that exact time. So if you miss it, you're pretty much put back on your degree, and it'll take you longer and cost you more. And another issue is counseling. So our counseling does have wait lists. So if you do miss the wait list, you have to wait another month. And you could and again, in animation, we also have another issue where we don't exactly have a lot of money for specialized animators. So if you do want to specialize in that field, we don't have instructors for that. Yeah.
If I could, Madam Chair, so it's really about course offerings and limitations to times, and which limits your ability if there's a conflict or whatever. You've got to pick one course over the other, and so you move to the next semester in order to actually get that course that you are required to graduate. So that's what I'm hearing. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in with respect to what does it mean to you when we talk about these deficits? So that's one example with respect to course offerings. Anything else you can share with me?
Puneet.
Thank you. So yes, as I mentioned in my speech, that we do not have housing on campus as big universities can build. So perhaps that if our colleges have enough funding, then they can have a good housing system for students, so that they are sure where they're gonna live, and they feel more comfortable and safer while arriving to the Canada.
Anybody else?
I'll just echo what my other two compatriots say here. At North Island College, we also see less course selections offered, so which will cause students to slow their education goals by, it could be a semester, but it could be much longer than that, a whole year. And then also we're in the similar, all of BC is a similar housing situation right now, but we feel it particularly crunch here in the Comox Valley. So housing on campus, we currently have a business plan to the city government, and we're looking for approval for that as well. So more funds on campus would help to see that those students would face the appropriate supports as well. I'll also echo what my other friend says here, as well as about counseling services and some of those more ancillary, but really important services for emotional health are often what needs to happen off the side of someone's desk, as opposed to being a dedicated service at a smaller institution like we all are here. So we see that some of those, what I would argue, more important services actually see less support and are then undervalued.
One more, or just, okay. This morning we heard from the three post-secondaries, the large post-secondaries, and we asked the question about mental health, and they've told us that they've tripled their budgets just to try and address the mental health issues. So on a smaller campus, I expect that it's even more difficult to, triple a budget kind of thing, because it's just not there. Is there anything that you want to add about mental health and services and how you're feeling? I know we did hear from student associations earlier this year, and I know that's one of the big topics, but is there anything you want to add to that conversation?
So just before you begin, I'm having trouble seeing the hands from here when you put your hand up, but I see that that both Puneet and Hamveer put your hands up. So if you want to address this specific question about mental health, great. If you want to address the previous question, that's good too. So,
Thank you.
Puneet.
Sorry, thanks. Yes, it can address both the questions. Yes, as Chair already mentioned that it's difficult for any institution to triple or even when it comes to smaller colleges or institutions, they have very limited amount of funds to use in specific areas. So while for increasing, like when pandemic hit, it was very difficult for a transformation to go into online and then arranging multiple options like medical or mental health services because of the lack of funds. And when this situation arises, their only option is to triple or increase the tuition fees of international students, because we have a cap on domestic student, which is 2%, but we do not have the cap on international tuition fees. This is the way out institutes look up for increasing their funds. And this I wanted to say. Thank you.
Hamveer, why don't you go next?
Yep. My point resonates with Puneet. Like, if a college is running in a deficit, they can always target to increase tuition fee for international students because there's no cap, it's not regulated. So that's the catch there. They can increase it anytime without any notice. Speaking about mental health, our college has started a mental health and well-being steering committee, and I am a part of it. And I would say I'll just do a quick comment on that. I guess it's a good committee, and it is reaching out to all the parties concerned, whether it be students or other departments on the campus, to take their feedback. And we are in stage of developing a framework for the mental health and well-being.
Ashika, and then Carissa.
Yeah, speaking about mental health, obviously, if we did have a bit more funding, we could afford more counselors and psychologists, because we do have a wait list right now. And speaking personally from my experience, the semester was pretty hard for me, and I have to get a few assessments done. So turns out my school couldn't exactly afford this because we can't afford psychologists, so we didn't have them. So I have to get it from an outside source, which I can't exactly afford. So it would be helpful with more funding if we could get psychologists and help the students with ADHD assessments or any other problems that they have. With the current counselors, we do have trauma counselors with all the recent attacks on Asian kids, but we still do need a lot more to help them. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so speaking to the mental health piece, the Here to Talk program that came into place has been very helpful. We received feedback from our members that having that tool is beneficial. In the years past, counselors on campus were only tasked with supporting folks with their academic life, but we've seen over and over and over again that our members need to have support with their emotional health as well. So the mandate of on-campus counselors has expanded quite a bit, and we see that their use has increased dramatically. And at our institution, our counselors wear more than one hat. Often a counselor is also tasked with having roles in student life, so their event planning and their counseling. And so more dedicated funding would allow our institution and institutions like us be able to have that dedicated support that many students need in that transition.
Harwinder has a question, and then Ben has a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the presenters. Thank you for highlighting we learned a lot today, how much colleges, even with the deficits, rely on international student fee, and we've heard about pretty much it's, in honest words, fee, gouging. And Puneet, my question, you mentioned that international students have to pay double healthcare premiums. Was there a recent increase in the healthcare premium? And can you tell us how much, like roughly, you pay? I know for the BC residents it's been waived. Just if you can touch upon that, because to me, hearing multiple presenters that how much sometimes 4 times more the fee, and then housing, and then the premiums, like a lot of things that we often people day to day don't think about. So if you can highlight that, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Yes, so at the moment, international student pays $75 per month for the healthcare, and it was in the beginning when the permanent residents were supposed to pay. The fees for international student was less, but because of the waive of them, they imposed all the fee increase to the international students.
Good to know. Thank you.
Ben.
Ashika, you mentioned in your presentation that there was a chronic underfunding at Emily Carr of $7 million. First of all, I'd like to know where you got the information to validate that. It's my understanding that education institutions are not allowed to run deficits. So where's that $7 million, that information coming from? The second question I want to ask you is, you mentioned $200 million of increased funding. And what I would like to just clarify, is that number for more than one institution or just Emily Carr?
To answer your second question, it's for more institutions, not only Emily Carr. And to answer your first one, for that one, we can give a written response in the September end hand-in for that one.
All right, well, thank you. I think that it's important that we do know the facts on this. Now, the $200 million, have you got a breakdown of that, or can you provide a breakdown to which post-secondary education institutions are looking for that and how it would be used?
We can provide a written breakdown with the September hand-in. Absolutely, we can do that.
Greg.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentations. International education is a pretty significant contributor, as you guys have recognized, for the provincial economy. One of our previous presenters had indicated that tuition fees in the last 4 years have gone up from $6,000 to $8,000 on average. That's about a 33% increase. And I'm sure that these post-secondary institutions must be having a look at, the factor, if they start increasing the rates too high, they're going to have a correlation and a reduction in potential kids actually coming to the post-secondary universities. But I'm just wondering, all the presenters that have come in, everybody's looking for more money, and I certainly appreciate that that's part of the presentation process. I'm just wondering if anybody can comment on your confidence level of the efficiency of the different organizations that you guys each represent. How confident are you that everything is being done to run the post-secondary institutions as efficiently as possible? Obviously it's always easy to ask for more money, but I'm just wondering what your confidence level is within the institutions that you attend, if their priorities are accurately putting the funds into where the students actually most need the funds in order to provide that post-secondary education that you're all looking for.
Carissa.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm just going to touch on the 200 million that was mentioned previously, and it kind of loops into this as well. So that figure comes from work that we're doing with British Columbia Federation of Students is the recommendation for across all 25 public post-secondaries, so that money would be distributed evenly or proportionately across the institutions. And you will be able to see more information in our written submission about some of that breakdown and what our recommendations are. But yes, that is meant to be across all the province. Fortunately, there's many controls and measures in place to dictate and mandate that public post-secondaries are run as economically efficient as possible, and with many reporting mechanisms in place. From my point of view, North Island College is doing its best work possible with the limited funds that they have to distribute education as equitably as possible as we can over such a large geographical area. Could they use support? Yes, for sure. But I think, given the tools that they have, they're doing a very fair and reasonable job. There's definitely shortfalls and there's definitely things that we can do better. I think colleges are so often just the starting point to someone's education. And when we see success at a college, it really impacts our communities so deeply. Graduation is my favorite time of the year. I absolutely love cheering on and seeing the families come together and yell and hoot and holler for every graduating student, because that impacts that family and that community with such deep ripples that I always end up in tears, honestly. So supporting our students early and often is going to see more completion rates, which is going to see a greater and quicker economic recovery for our province.
And Ishika, did you have your hand up?
To answer the question, I believe what my university is doing is pretty good so far with the funding that they do have, because they just want what's best in mind for the students. And with everything that they have, they still, with whatever little we have so far, they've still been pretty good and equally dividing it to all the students, and they have been reaching out for help. So if we do have more funding, it would be a lot better. And in fall, when I do start in the Senate, I will see the funding more efficiently. So.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions? Lauren.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Puneet, if she's still there. I see her camera off. You brought up housing, and of course that has been brought up a number of times during discussion today. It might be too personal to ask, but could you give me a sense of what, you said that you don't have dorm or on-campus living there. Can you give me a sense of what that cost is for you or other students? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I really would like to know.
No, thank you for your question. It will give a sense how much international students are paying. So we sometimes we have limitations of number of people per house, but me and my roommates, we are living in apartments. So we are 3 sharing 2-bedroom apartment, and it's about $16.95. We have figured out the cheapest apartment in the Victoria City. And as I told you, it's like sometimes students have to make choices if they want to go with the good apartment near to the college, or they are looking for cheaper apartment. It can be 2 hours away from the college. So as my apartment is not that near to my college, if I was looking near to my college, then it was around 1,800 or maybe 2,000 plus. And it was very expensive, so that we could not it was not affordable, because once international students arrive in Canada, it's not that they are not earning in the Canadian dollars. They are coming back from different currencies, and which is way more. If I talk about my Indian currency, it is $1 is around 60 Indian rupee, which cut down into so much that we in the beginnings, international students prefer to go with the cheaper side, and they adjust with the quality and distance from their colleges. Sorry, I'm not able to hear you.
Thank you for sharing that information.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, I think we're pretty well out of time. But thank you for your presentations, and thank you for your candid answers to the questions. You've really given us quite a bit of insight into the challenges that students have today. So thank you for that. And we'll now take a short recess. Bye-bye. Call the meeting back to order. And I understand our panelists are all present, and we'll start with Debbie Tablotny. Debbie, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. I'm hoping you can hear me. We haven't tested this. You can hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. My name is Debbie Tablotny. I am the vice chair of the Richmond School District, and I am presenting on behalf of the board and for the chair, Sandra Nixon. So we just wanted to thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate in this budget consultation and share our priorities for the upcoming provincial budget with you. So we have a couple of key messages. And one is our provincial funding to support COVID recovery in schools. Our district made tremendous efforts in 2021 school year to minimize the spread of COVID while maintaining educational programs for our students. And the pandemic has had a significant impact on our district's financial position. The district is facing a $7.2 million budget shortfall in 2021-22. Primarily, it's due to reduced revenues as a result of the pandemic. We've had to make significant cuts to staffing across all our employee groups, and to balance the budget. So several resources of revenue, including international education, rental revenues, investment income, have been negatively impacted. We acknowledge and appreciate the pandemic-related provincial and federal funds received in 2020 and 2021. The Richmond School District received $1.4 million in provincial funds and over $7.8 million in federal safe return funds in 2021. And these funds were spent in a number of areas, such as transitional learning program, which was actually the largest proportionally in the province. And of course, enhanced cleaning, staffing, and PPE equipment, technology, and employee health and wellness support. With the availability of the vaccine, our society is looking forward to entering the recovery phase, and the safety of students and staff remains our number one priority. In fall of 2021, we will require everyone in the education system to be nimble in contributing to the success of our students. Our district requires continued provincial support to allow us to provide a healthy learning environment for our students and staff. The K-9 distributed learning program, which is new to our district for 2021-22, for students that want to continue remote learning, will likely require some additional staffing. Our health and safety guidelines from the Ministry of Health, BC-CDC, that were announced before the end of August. Enhanced cleaning requirements will still be required, including some daytime custodial staff to do the disinfecting of high touch areas, etc. And it's currently included as a budget adjustment. Last school year, it was funded from the COVID relief funds on a one-time basis. So we'll need some additional staffing to support the schools in welcoming the students back, especially for our parents and staff and students to feel confident that our schools are safe and clean. Funding, we will need funding to support PPE, including masks, hand sanitizers, and safety supplies. Mental health support for students and staff will be continue to be required, as well as 44% of our elementary classrooms in our district currently do not have mechanical ventilation systems, and capital funding will be required for that. Number 2 priority is continued investment in seismically safe schools and major capital projects. In 2004, the Ministry of Education launched the School Seismic Mitigation Program and identified schools that may have structural risks associated with a seismic event. In Richmond, we had 37 schools that were identified with at least one high-risk building section needed to be addressed under the SMP. And Richmond is identified as a geographic area with unstable soil conditions and risks of liquefaction.
You're out of time now.
Out of time?
Yes.
Wow.
You had 5 minutes, but what I'm going to suggest is that when we have questions at the end, that may be an opportunity for you to make some more points.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, so now we'll turn to our next presenter, Jen Mezzi with School District 41.
Good afternoon, committee members. It's with gratitude that I'm joining you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish nations of Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh and the Hunkaminam and Snohomish-speaking peoples who have been stewards of this land since time immemorial. Today's reality is very different than when the Burnaby School District presented to this committee last year. Responding to the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged us to utilize our infrastructure to assist in systemic pandemic response, but has also highlighted the many challenges that have faced districts across the province. I'm incredibly proud of the work that was done last year to meet the needs of our community while keeping schools open for in-person learning, and incredibly grateful for the commitment of our school-based and district-based staff to focus not only on learning, but also connection and safety. However, the last 18 months has made us look at our education system through a different lens and highlighted inequities in our system and strain on our infrastructure, including to financial and to human resources. The Burnaby School District submission focuses on new recommendations in previous submissions pertaining to capital project funding, including facilities, ventilation and portables, equity, including supplemental funding for students with disabilities and diverse abilities, additional funding for Indigenous language education and mental health supports, as well as sustainability. We'll be submitting our full submission later on in the next couple of weeks. Today, I will be presenting on the recommendations pertaining to capital funding and, if I have time, sustainability. The board recognizes and is grateful for the provincial government for the recent infusion of capital funding into the Ministry of Education. Our school district has benefited greatly from this investment as we have advanced many schools that have a high risk for remediation or where school additions are required, as well as funding for new childcare spaces. The district has an aggressive long-range facility plan to ensure our students are provided modern, safe, and sustainable learning environments. Adequate capital funding must be retained to meet this goal. Our first recommendation is on minor capital funding, and it's recommended the government significantly increase grants provided to maintain existing building infrastructure, such as the annual facility grant and school enhancement program, to decrease the deferred maintenance liability that currently exists and to allow school enhancements that improve the learning environment. Significant additional funding is required to address deferred life cycle maintenance of schools. According to a recent BCSDA report, in 2020, the routine capital program funded by the provincial government for schools totaled $204 million. By comparison, the estimated cost of repairs and maintenance recommended by building system engineers engaged by the ministry was more than double that amount at $441 million. Our second recommendation is on school ventilation, and it is recommended that government provide additional funding to prioritize the installation of adequate ventilation systems in all schools to ensure that recommended air exchange occur as required by the BC Centre for Disease Control and the American Society for Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, ASHRAE. Ventilation continues to be one of the more protective environmental measures that is referenced in the hierarchy for infection prevention and exposure control measures for communicable disease in the current provincial COVID-19 communicable disease guidelines for K-12 settings. The Burnaby Board of Education is grateful to the provincial government for the $77.5 million that has been made available to school districts through routine capital funding, specifically for HVAC system upgrades or replacements in 2021 and 2022. However, additional funding is urgently needed to address the many older classrooms across the province without ventilation systems able to accommodate MERV 13 filters, including classrooms that are not connected to ventilation systems at all. Although these classrooms are compliant with CDC regulations, CDC guidelines, they do not meet the same standards as newer classrooms, since referenced in Part 4 of the OHS regulation for a building ventilation system installed prior to 1989, an adequate supply of indoor air must be provided in accordance with the ASHRAE standards, and I must stress, in place at the time the ventilation system was designed. As just stated by Dr. Henry in the last hour, every school has done an assessment on ventilation, and it is with our district assessment in mind that we strongly recommend the government provide significant additional funding to prioritize the installation of adequate ventilation in schools to address this issue. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to present to the committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. And our last speaker on this panel is Carrie Palmer-Isaac, School District 43.
Hello there. Thank you for having me today. I am Chair Palmer-Isaac from SD 43 Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, Port Moody, Anmore, and Belcarra. And I will try and squish a lot into my presentation in a short time as well. We believe that funding for a K-12 education system should be adequate to ensure equity and accountability. Additional predictable and sustainable funding is required to address the serious funding shortfalls that many school districts face. And I'm going to outline those in 4 main themes. The first one is supporting vulnerable students, then supporting education curriculum changes, sustainable and equitable funding, and overall education system funding. The first one, supporting vulnerable students, I have 4 different areas to cover as well. The first is to address learning loss, which is one of the great challenges we're facing right now. Since late 2019-2020 school year, when global pandemic started to disrupt learning in schools, students have experienced increased challenges. Decreases in in-class instruction time has been detrimental to the social and academic advancements for many students, particularly those of our students who are most vulnerable. Even after a relatively consistent 2021, many students have had difficulty in achieving personal academic success and have fallen below established benchmarks. The next one I'd like to touch on is mental health support funding. While there have been an increase in the downloading of health services to education system, there's a cost associated with providing these services, and that has not been adequately funded, resulting in districts having to redirect funds from the classroom. The Select Standing Committee on Children and Youth in BC's government have identified that supports for students with mental health challenges should be a #1 priority. The rise of students struggling with anxiety and depression and other mental health challenges has been well documented. In SD 43 and other school districts, these students are some of the most challenging to support. The existing funding is inadequate to support their needs. We realize that their attendance, safety, and academic success, and often the school's culture climate, the impact is significant when these challenges are not addressed. We recommend that increased funding to support students with mental health related challenges and providing a model that will work with all 3 ministries, Ministry of Children, Family Development, Health, and Mental Health and Addictions, will provide wraparound support for these students. Third is funding for students with special needs. The funding formula for students with special needs is inadequate, and funding for early identification is crucial in addition to the adequacy of support for these programs. It's clearly understood that students with special needs require additional supports. Community link funding is my 4th area under this topic. Our community link funding for vulnerable student supplement, which is now called the Equity of Opportunity funding, are important for supporting our vulnerable students. However, both are significantly underfunded, and there are allocation inequities amongst the school districts. Most recently, this funding in our school district was cut by more than 15%. This funding goes to support our most vulnerable students. Support for new education curriculum changes. Funding for support of our implementation of BC's new curriculum has fallen short of expectation. Directives around the framework for enhanced student learning supports cannot be fulfilled until adequate funding has been made available. Our grant for curriculum and student support has been cut over the last 2 years, and implementing the new curriculum itself requires an increased commitment of staffing at the district level in order to provide classroom teachers with resources and support. A modern curriculum requires modern technology to be effective as well. Changes to student assessment models require teacher training and support from district level staff. Providing training and feedback and ongoing structure around classroom teachers is crucial to the successful adoption of these new protocols. It's imperative that there's equity for all students and financial support and funding in its place to provide equity through the education system. This includes appropriate funding for educational tools to deliver education in the 21st century. I'm going to jump forward into capital funding now because I think it's very important in our district. We're encouraged by new schools and seismic replacement and upgrade funding capital initiatives this government and encourage continuance and growth in this area. We want our children to achieve educational success in safe buildings. Unfortunately, the practice of requiring school districts to contribute funds destined for student needs and being redirected into capital projects is cross-purpose to successful education. We wholeheartedly support the funding model recommendation that capital funds should not be directed out of the classroom rather than fully funded by the government. I'd like to encourage the government to fully support the quantum required to meet the educational needs the new funding model will likely reflect. In addition, I'm running out of time. Well, I'm going to close and say thank you very much to the Select Standing Committee for the time that you have given us, and the rest of my recommendations are in my letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Now we have roughly 15 minutes to take questions from the committee. Okay, I think committee members are still perhaps collecting their thoughts. So why don't we go back to Debbie? I know you had a few more things you wanted to say, so maybe in a couple of sentences you can summarize what you didn't get to tell us in the first place.
Sure, thank you very much. What we did want to say was that since 2019, we've had no new seismic mitigation projects announced for our district. Sorry, and none of the 24 remaining projects have been supported and announced in the 2021 capital response letters, and delays to support and funding for seismic upgrade of schools will result in increased levels of risk for students. Annual cost inflation rate makes the projects more expensive, and the lack of projects could potentially lead to a loss of staff. So those are the things that we really wanted to get across. And I'm sorry I didn't get through all that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pam has a question.
It's for Coquitlam. You got to 2 of your 5, I believe. If you could just give us the other 3, but not with the same level of detail you did in the first point, if you could, please.
Sorry, and thank you very much. I'm more than happy to just touch on the other ones that we had in there. We had our high priority, which I really tried to go into in depth with, was supporting for our vulnerable students. And I think that I would be remiss if that wasn't the focus or the largest bulk of my presentation. But our next areas were support for new education curriculum changes, sustainable and equitable funding, overall education funding, and capital funding. And I did touch on capital funding just very, very briefly because we have been struggling with that. I know that other districts have mentioned the same scenario, and that is something that we're working very hard to bring in line. One of the other parts that I'd love to touch on, though, is our support for the new educational curriculum changes. And in terms of equitable funding, in my notes here, we were underfunded in our budget for 2021 to the degree to cover collective agreement labor settlement costs. And our district actually absorbed a shortfall of 3.5 million that year. This translated into reduced teacher staffing. So I don't think that was the goal that was intended in that scenario. And that's the shortfall that we ended up with. And I think that's something definitely worth bringing attention to. But I'm happy to touch base on any of the other areas that you'd like to discuss, including capital funding.
No, I'm good, thank you. So I just wanted to ensure that I had captured the main points. That was what I was after, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ben.
Thanks very much. It was mentioned, at least by two of you, about the seismic funding. And the model, you mentioned that there had to be a partnership in that with the school districts coming up with a certain amount of money. We've been at this for a long time. I mean, we've been at this for like 20 years. And I mean, what's the model and why is it a barrier? Because I thought that as government, we chose to make certain that there was seismic safety in our schools, especially in the Lower Mainland.
I'm happy to respond. I'm not the best example because we have received a seismic project in Coquitlam, but we are contributing funds to that project. So that is actually a good indication of what is actually transpiring, is that we are required to contribute funding to that seismic project. Some of it, of course, is to cover the increase in the number of students that will be in attendance in that building. And I would add that it took many, many years for this to be recognized, and it was our #1 seismic replacement project. So we had a lot of very, very concerned parents in our community advocating very, very vocally for the fact that they felt their students were in an unsafe building. So I do appreciate that, but I'm happy to go to my colleagues.
Go ahead, Deborah. I'll go after you.
Jen?
I think it's Deb.
Yes, I'd be happy to answer that. I think for our district, it's not about the seismic, the cost sharing. Our concern is really that we've had no projects approved. So.
Maybe I'll just add one more thing. I think that Deborah touched on the lack of and the loss of revenues with international education programs. And I think especially for districts in the metro area, a lot of that cost sharing for capital projects came from other revenue sources because we tried to keep educational dollars that are intended for the classroom inside the classroom. For example, with Stride Elementary School, which is going to be a new build, which is actually a carbon neutral, net carbon zero project, we are going to be contributing $3.5 million, I believe, to that project. As well as Burnaby North, there's a significant amount of money that is coming from the district as well. So I think it's one of those pieces where when you look at the other challenge that we're really facing in our district is being able to procure land to be able to build new schools where we need to expand. And I think it's an issue that is actually facing a lot of metro areas, and it's something that that we feel very strongly needs to be looked at.
Okay, sorry, Chair, if I could just ask one more. So Deb, I just want to better understand. You said that there's nothing approved, and I don't know what the process is and how many schools you have in your district, but what's the percentage of schools that still need seismic upgrading in your district?
There were 37 identified as needing seismic upgrades. We have 24 left that still need seismic upgrading. And we have 48 schools in our district.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mike, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all of you for your presentations. My question is to Carrie. with regards to the supporting the vulnerable student that you've outlined here. And I can see all of the ones that are cost, we need funding for this, we need funding for this. But you used a term that was fresh to me, and that was learning loss. And so how do you fund learning loss?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to that. I think that we're going to have to look at that through staffing. I think that my colleagues would probably support that. We're going to really need to aggressively look at that through staffing and through professional development and professional training, and with technology. We're really struggling, and I hate to say this, even now going into September, I'm getting email, I'm sure my colleagues are getting email as well, about students and parents that are uncertain about returning back to school again in this September. So trying to reach and work with those students that are not going to be in attendance, that don't want to do a full-time online program, that want an alternative, is something that we're really struggling with. Asking our staff to be able to reach students online and teach in a classroom at the same time has not resulted in a good end result. And we recognize that. So I think we need some alternatives definitely in that direction, but I think it's really going to boil down to staffing. And I'm confident that my other two colleagues here have similar situations in their district that they have shared concerns around.
Jen.
Maybe just to add to that as well, I think one of the areas that does require funding is when you look at learning loss. I'm also the chair of the ELL Consortium, which is a consortium of trustees and educators when it comes to supporting ELL students and students who need settlement services. And what really stuck with me last year was when we looked at, there were some districts who reported that the students who had been assessed after a year had actually lost language acquisition. And so I think that's one of those things that we're looking at. Currently, when we look at funding for ELL students, there's a 5-year cap. And things have changed where some students, especially students who have never had formal education before, who are coming to us and need language supports, they may need more than 5 years of language supports. And especially when we look at the challenges that have faced a lot of language acquisition because of COVID-19, we feel very strongly that that cap of 5 years needs to be removed.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Greg.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just following up on the seismic upgrades, I think you indicated there was 48 schools in your district, 37 required some form of seismic upgrading, 24 have yet to actually achieve any upgrading. Have there been any announcements? You indicated there was none announced this last year. Have you had any schools announced for seismic upgrading in, say, the last 4 years?
We did have a few in the previous 2 years, but in the last 2 years, we have had none. Our district, we were moving ahead, and there was a promise from the ministry to expedite because we had so many, and we have unique soil conditions in Richmond. However, that seems to have come to a bit of a standstill. And we have submitted several projects, and I've listed them in the brief, which you should have in front of you, but none of them have been approved at this point.
Just a bit of a follow-up. Thank you very much for that. Has there been any commitment as far as the time frame? Like, is there a guarantee that these will all be completed in the next 10 years, 15 years? Has there been any kind of commitment, I guess, made by the Ministry of Education for the seismic upgrades that are required on these remaining 24 schools?
The commitment was to complete all our seismic upgrade projects by 2030.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to fall short.
Okay, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you so much for your time and your commitment to K-12 education. You've given us a lot of food for thought. Thanks so much. And with that, we'll say goodbye.
I think we got it.
Okay, we have another presentation, Kathy McMillan, representing Dyslexia BC. So Kathy, there you are.
We are. Sorry about the confusion here. And can you see the presentation?
No, we can see you.
Sorry, can you see the presentation and can you hear me?
Hear you and we can see you.
Okay, perfect. Can I start?
Yes, please do.
What's going on?
They can see you, so they can't see the presentation.
They said they could see both.
Do you want me Host disabled
participant.
Just
Okay.
somebody's gotta give you access to screen share.
So okay.
No, we're not doing it that way. If you want to read the presentation.
Okay. Can I see the presentation though? Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
No, not a problem, really.
Okay. So thank you, committee members, for having me here today. And thank you, committee members, for having me here today and presenting at the Budget 2022 consultation process. I'm here today representing Dyslexia BC, which is a parent-led grassroots movement concerned with limited access to interventions for dyslexia in BC. We are advocating for a universal definition of dyslexia, mandatory teacher training on dyslexia, mandatory early screening, mandatory remediation programs, and access to appropriate assistive technologies. Did you know that 1 in 5 people in BC have a learning disability? 80% of all learning disabilities are dyslexia. That means there's a lot of people in BC with dyslexia. We've advocated all the way to the ministry level and asked for early screening for struggling readers. And also, did you know that it takes 4 times longer to remediate dyslexia if you wait until grade 3 or 4 to start remediation? We've previously asked for increased access to accessible material, including audiobooks. We've asked for legislation for dyslexia. In the US, 48 states have made dyslexia-specific legislation, and in Canada, they've made no dyslexia legislation to date. We have also asked to bring back the funded Category J, which was reserved for severe learning disabilities, and it was taken away in 2002. So our requests from Dyslexia BC today from the Budget Committee are to bring back a funded category for LD, include some psychology services as part of MSP for diagnosis, remove learning disability diagnosis from the education system, implement universal dyslexia screening in kindergarten and access to structured literacy within legislation in all classrooms, and add screening centers for adults. To bring back the J category, it will cost about $4,000 per student. Once the remediation process is done, you could probably lower it to about $2,000. If MSP covered psychological services, which would include diagnosis for dyslexia and other learning disabilities, it would take about 12 hours every 5 years for a diagnosis. And a diagnosis would probably be needed only for students that are continuing education. After that, you could screen for dyslexia, which would only take about an hour. Early literacy screening should cost between $0 and $10 and can be done right in the classroom, which is pretty cost effective. So we looked on the ministry website, including the BC Children's Hospital website, to find information on resources for learning disabilities. We pretty much found nothing. So this is the Children's Hospital website. This is the Ministry of Children and Family Development website. Lots about autism, lots about intellectual disabilities and other complex needs, but nothing about dyslexia. We asked families and individuals with dyslexia, a total of 356 people responded, and we asked them if they felt included in government initiatives towards disability, and 89% of them said no. What does dyslexia and learning disability do to a person? It affects their self-esteem, gives them depression, unemployment, underemployment, and they are overrepresented in the incarcerated population, and that only gets worse without a diagnosis. What does the Ministry of Education say? The funding levels are 1, 2, and 3, which we're not included. They say if you aren't included in a funding category, the answer is no. You often get no service and student is told they are not funded and therefore receives no support. Even if we move to a prevalence model, which the Ministry of Education is pushing towards, it won't be any different. We're going to get a no, we're going to pushed into the system, we won't get a diagnosis, which isn't good for anyone. Here are the funded categories, 1, 2, 3. Learning disabilities is an afterthought in the paragraph after. This is right out of the Ministry of Education funding model. What happens to kids and adults that aren't diagnosed? They get pushed up into the mental health. Mental health should actually only be about 5% of disabilities represented in BC. So what are my key asks for the funding budget committee this year would be to bring back the J category, include some psychology services as part of MSP, remove learning disability diagnosis from the education system, implement universal dyslexia screening in kindergarten and access to structured literacy with legislation in all classrooms and screening centers for adults. And what will that do? The positive impact of funding people with learning disabilities like dyslexia will have equitable access because they will have early prevention, less mental health issues, higher literacy rates, and overall access will be improved. Thanks for listening today.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And we have some questions for you.
Okay, perfect.
So Ben and then Greg.
Thanks very much, Kathy. I just wanted to find out, you mentioned about having psychologists and doing some of this if we return to that. Have you given any thought to how many psychologists are in British Columbia and what would the numbers be to actually implement this, or is the timeline quite a bit longer? So I'm just wondering, what's the gap today in terms of the people that could do a proper assessment?
I think there's enough psychologists in BC currently. Right now, what's happened is there's a 2-tier system. So the people that can afford to pay for assessments are doing that. So the psychologists are there. They're getting paid privately or by extended medical. But if we decide to screen starting in kindergarten, the need for assessments later on will be reduced.
Okay, thank you.
It's a matter of prioritizing things differently more than more money.
Okay.
But the number one budget ask for you guys today is to bring back that funding category, because without a funding category for LD kids, like the Ministry of Education even admits that school districts tell these kids and families that there's no funding and you don't get services.
Thank you. Greg.
Madam Chair, Kathy, thank you for bringing this to our attention. It sounds like the ounce of prevention versus the pound of cure. Has the Ministry of Education provided any statistics on what the actual gross cost would be or annual cost would be to provide that early intervention or, I guess, detection of those that might have dyslexia in the school system?
I honestly don't think it would cost that much. And like I mentioned, the screening in kindergarten costs $0 to $10 per child. They already purchase materials that are similar. So like I keep saying, it's just a matter of reshuffling and reorganizing.
Great, thank you.
Pam.
Thank you. Why was the J category removed in 2002?
Apparently, Christy Clark said was so that they could include all kids with learning disabilities. So just like eyesight or autism or any other disability, there's varying degrees of learning disabilities. So you could be mild to very severe. One of my family members has severe dyslexia, and she's still reading at the grade 2 level. We've had no government help at all to fund that. But Christy Clark outright said that she wanted to. There were 2 categories. There was the mild to moderate category, and then the J category. And what they did was they amalgamated the 2 categories into one, and said that all kids would be able to get help now because there was one category. because the kids with the mild to moderate were getting left out. That's the only thing I've heard of, and I've asked several people why it was removed. Maybe you could help me answer that question.
I can't, actually. That's why I'm stumped here. But, okay, so there were two categories, and so they were merged into one to include that range of disability under the dyslexia category. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, learning disability.
Just under learning disability. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand. So was it too much of a definition then? It was too specific, and that's why they wanted to make it like broader. I'm still struggling with understanding.
When they changed the funding category, they had what they called directed funding back before 2002. So autism, let's say, I don't know the exact numbers, but autism was probably $10,000. So if a child was diagnosed with autism, they go to the school, they bring their diagnosis, and then what would happen is the principal would designate that student with the ministry as a child with special needs, and he has autism. So then the ministry would give that school the funding for that child at $10,000 to help with the SEAs or whatever that you need help with. And for kids with severe learning disabilities would get designated, and I think it was around $3,000 that the school would get for that specific child. So then what they did in 2002 is the principal applies for all his funding and designations, and he gets a lump sum. So that money isn't targeted towards any individual student. They raised autism to about close to $19,000 and other medical issues, $19,000. They made a behavioral category, which is $10,000, and a few other, like those boxes I showed in there had funded categories, and they start at 5 to 10,000, then go to 19,000, then go up to 40,000. And then learning disability was pushed all in together and supposed to be included in base funding. And I know that my one child with severe dyslexia has gone to remedial centers 3-4 months at a time, where she's been sent in a cab and that sort of thing. I don't know where the district gets the money for it, because she doesn't come with funding. She's designated as a child with special needs, but she does not come with a supplemental funding.
Thank you for further explaining this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathy. I see no other questions. You've actually educated us.
Oh, thank you. And I'm so
so
sorry for being late. It was a bit of a kerfuffle, but...
no, that was just fine. No problem. So
Okay.
Thank you for your leadership on this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We'll now take a recess until, where are we at?
10-minute recess.
We'll take a 10-minute recess. Not yet? Okay, we have a panel of school districts about to present. The first one on the list is Maria Hampfent, School District 46. And whenever you're ready, Maria.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Hampfent, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Sunshine Coast Board of Education. SD 46 spans the coastal communities along a 180-kilometer peninsula northwest of Vancouver. We are so grateful to work on the beautiful traditional unceded lands of both the Sechelt and the Squamish nations. We serve over 3,200 students and employ over 600 staff at our 14 schools. Diversity, inclusion, and equity are three of our key values for student success. The pandemic revealed areas of inequity in our district that have only become more pronounced. Since 2020, we've developed anti-racism and anti-poverty policies and are deeply committed to partnering with the ministry for our equity scan. Last year, our district provided additional resources through access to food, technology, mental health, and well-being supports for students, their families, and staff. Studies confirm the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact for minority students with diverse abilities, lower incomes, racialized populations, LGBTQ2S+, and Indigenous students. Now more than ever, our commitment to equity is paramount in ensuring success for our students. From the ages of 5 to 17, most students in BC spend over 900 hours per year in schools. For many vulnerable students, time at school presents their only access to healthy meals, counseling, mental health supports, supportive adults, and a safe environment. We know that there is an interdependence between health and education. Students whose basic needs are met are better learners, and better educated people make healthier decisions. We must support the optimal conditions for the education of our youth, and we must be funded accordingly to deliver. Several years ago, our district partnered with MCFD as part of a pilot project to develop a full-time integrated clinician position that worked across the two systems. While the pilot proved successful, a lack of financial commitment was a key challenge to sustaining this position. We applaud the K-12 Education Recovery Plan 2021 to 2022, which encourages boards to work collaboratively with both the MCFD and the DAA to explore the needs of families during COVID recovery. And we urge the province to commit additional funding to support these integrated models of care. Studies have revealed that an investment in education results in savings to other ministries down the road. For every $1 invested in education, the province sees an economic return of $11. Investing in our youth is a more efficient use of limited taxpayer resources and allows for early intervention. Coming from a systems thinking lens, investing in education is the strongest lever for a betterment of our society at large. For this reason, a collaborative interministerial approach with financial resources targeted at educating children continues to be a solid investment in the human capital of our province. We don't yet know what recovery will entail, but what we do know is that year after year, school districts in BC report that targeted funding for students with special needs is insufficient. In an average year, we spend double the amount we receive to support students with diverse abilities. Without an influx in targeted funding, school resources will be stretched more than ever while we serve this population. Our board was encouraged to see that the Premier cite the importance of food supports in his ministerial mandate letter from November of 2020. According to our recent regional report, more than 1 in 4 of our children live in poverty. We have witnessed the increase in food security in our student population firsthand. In 2020, the demand for family grocery vouchers rose by 400%. We urgently need additional funding to support the increased demand for food programs, typically supplemented by external grants, and last year funded by COVID support. This fall, we used surplus funds that would otherwise have gone towards classroom supports. And this is not a sustainable option, given the demands we face as educators. Lastly, salary increases for non-union staff, which includes school principals and superintendents, are linked with provincially negotiated union wage increases, but are not funded. This has a hollowing out effect and creates a structural deficit that results in resources being removed from the classroom. All districts will benefit from equitable, consistent, and predictable funding that is not only linked to increased student enrollment. Thank you for listening. I am so grateful for the opportunity to advocate for youth. I passionately agree with the ministry's direction to focus on the whole child as we address the impacts of the pandemic. Please support us to excel by increasing your investment in public education. It is the key to promoting greater equity, stronger mental health, catalyzing systems change for the common good towards a unified, successful future of this great land. Alnumsh Chalap.
Thank you, Maria. And now we'll hear from Chris Johns, School District Number 5, Southeast Kootenay.
There we are. Can you hear me okay? Good.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for the opportunity to once again present to the committee. Similar to other school districts, we have two focus for our presentation. One is on funding with respect to special education, and the second focus is on school life cycle funding. We know that all students have unique educational needs. Most students are able to be educated within the funding of the basic allocation. Approximately 14% of the Southeast Kootenay School District student population is identified as having diverse abilities or disabilities and require additional support to meet their needs and graduate with confidence and purpose. We also know there's an unparalleled increase in the complexity of students and their needs each year. Some of the reasons include students survived medical difficulties during birth that were not prevalent a decade ago, increased experience of adverse childhood trauma, a significant annual increase in the students diagnosed with autism, and fourthly, we would add that the mental health issues that are resulting as a result of the pandemic. As a result, some students require up to 4 times the amount of support funding to educate than most students. These students equally deserve a fully funded, unreduced education along with their peers. We are projecting for the 2021-2022 academic year, the Ministry of Education targeted funding provided 14% of our total district budget to attempt to meet these needs. In the same academic year, 7.4% of our total district budget amount was pulled from the basic allocation to further meet the needs of students. Using basic allocation funding to supplement student supports has been a district practice since the deregulation of a portion of the special education funding in 2001-2002. For 2021-2022 academic year, the Ministry of Education has reported approximately a 4% increase in provincial targeted funding. These increases have only provided for the correct sizing of the funding required to educate some of our most complex students, which is welcomed and appreciated, but is long overdue to bring funding in line with support staff salary increases. As a result, we will continue to use funds from the basic allocation to minimally meet the service needs of students. Targeted funding for all students with needs would work best for our district, and we suspect for many other districts in the province. More support service funding is required to properly consider the needed support and to increase the Southeast Kootenay School District's 91% 6-year graduation completion rates for all students. What about the other 9%? Lastly, adequate funding is the moral and ethical thing to do. Second part of our presentation is on school life cycle funding. We echo the comments from the report prepared by the BC School Trustees Association of March, which refers to the work which must be completed over the life of a building to ensure it remains in peak operating condition. The report highlights the impacts of time to our facilities and the resulting increased cost for maintenance, which is evident in the East Kootenay. As is the case in Cranbrook, where Mount Baker Secondary School is in its 7th decade. It just had its 70th birthday. We appreciate the necessity of seismic upgrades to the facilities in BC to ensure we mitigate injury and damage for future events, but the province needs to address the aging infrastructure in all of the education sector before it is too late. The districts which fall outside of seismic areas have continued to maintain a minimum level, which is barely considered acceptable to operate schools. The learning environment for the students and the health and safety of our employees are integral to improving educational outcomes for all students, developing the educated student, and ensuring there is continuous improvement to the educational outcomes for all students. For too long, the focus has been on fitting kids into spaces. It is about time we start building spaces for students and their learning needs and their stages of development. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present our school district's concerns.
Thank you, Chris. And next we'll hear from Tim Bennett, School District 57, Prince George.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased and honored to be joining you today from the ancestral lands of the Lheidli T'enneh, representing School District 57 and the 13,000 students that we're currently serving. Recently, our district approved our new strategic plan, which focuses on 4 key areas: truth and reconciliation, equity of access, wellness, and learning. And today, we just wanted to highlight a few of our concerns that align with those areas. First off, around the idea of predictable and sustainable funding. We recognize as an education system that we have a job to do to provide quality and equitable public education. We're asking that the K-12 education system is sufficiently funded to provide and deliver not only the new curriculum equitably to all of our students, but to ensure that the districts are able to cover the costs of inflationary, contractually negotiated, and PSEC approved increases. I echo the concerns expressed by my colleague from SD 46 regarding the salary increases for our principals, vice principals, and exempt staff. It does not make sense that incremental funding is provided only for unionized staff of a school district. All of our employees in each and every district contribute to improving student learning and student achievements. It is our recommendation to fully fund general wage increases for all staff in the same manner that funding is provided for increases provided to unionized staff, as compensation guidelines and approvals are provided by Treasury Board through the Public Sector Employers Council and should be funded by government. We're seeing increased inequities across not only our district, but across the province, and more students and families are living in poverty. We do applaud government's work to develop a poverty reduction strategy and their commitment to provide food programs and mental health supports to students. We are asking government to consider increasing funding for a comprehensive and accountable provincial poverty reduction strategy, with facilitated implementation of such a strategy across ministries to ensure the strategy addresses the need for all vulnerable students and families. We are confident that this recommendation will help improve student achievement and success for not only our students, but the families that we serve as a district. School District 57 is a large district in the province. As a district, we represent 52,000 square kilometers, stretching just over 5 hours from point to point. We have high schools of over 1,000 students, elementary schools close to 600, and elementary schools that have just over 20 students. This represents a good microcosm of the province as a whole, where we're trying to balance the needs of our urban and rural students. It is safe to say that providing education in small rural communities is essential, as schools are not only a place for education, but can help drive the economic success of small communities. We are asking that government do further consultation and ensure the processes are in place to provide equitable access to quality education in all small rural communities. And finally, we want to echo the concerns of our colleagues from SD5 with regards to aging school facilities. In School District 57, most of our buildings rate by the Ministry of Education's Facility Condition Index as poor. Despite this poor rating, our facilities, services staff, and custodial staff do an amazing job each day to ensure that our buildings are clean and safe places for learning and working. Even through COVID-19, we have ensured that our buildings remain safe and a caring place for students. Due to the emergent work that comes up with our aging infrastructure, our annual facility grant needs to be prioritized, and important preventative maintenance work is often postponed. We were encouraged to see recommendations related in last year's report related to sustainable capital funding for school districts. We also appreciate the availability of the School Enhancement Program and Carbon Neutral Program, where we receive other significant upgrades. We are asking government to increase the annual facility grant funding, school enhancement program, and carbon neutral capital program funding annually to address the identified provincial shortfall of capital infrastructure to extend the useful life of schools at our facilities. Thank you very much for your time and for your consideration.
Thank you, Tim. And before we open it up for questions, we'll hear from Helen Gilbert, representing School District Number 60. Helen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am the chair of our School District 60 board, and I am coming to you today from the territory of the Deneza and Treaty 8. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present today, and my intention is to expand on aspects of our written presentation where we highlighted our need in the 4 areas of COVID recovery, recruitment, retention, staffing challenges, compensation, capital funding for building upgrades and school capacity, and transportation. We echo many of the things I've already heard today. Our board is proud of our district and the achievement of our students and the effort of our staff. The ministry's focus in documents that guide our work is equity. I think of equity in the following way. Educational opportunities should not be defined by a student's postal code. It is very sad for me to say to you today that in our district right now, postal code matters in terms of what students can access. Our pandemic challenges continue, and September 30th enrollment is a worry. We trust that the ministry will listen if difficulties emerge. Recruitment and retention results in equity challenges. Getting people with the right skills and abilities to offer a wide range of educational things in our town and rural schools is difficult. The North deserves well-trained staff that can meet the diverse needs of our community. Make a Future has helped with recruitment, but we often need to go further in our efforts, and this costs, and that takes away from the money that we can put into student services. Job satisfaction is a factor in retention. Shortage of teachers teaching on call and trained casual support staff are a factor in staff burnout and diminished job satisfaction. Student learning is also impacted. When teachers do not get their scheduled support staff to assist students in the room or have revolving casuals, it makes things difficult for everyone. Imagine being the principal who has to make many calls to the casual list and comes up short. They then looked at many different staffing arrangements and completed a daily triage of need. In the end, they are forced to make the very difficult call of, I'm sorry, but I can't have your child at school today because there is no one with the skills to insert their feeding tube or do their throat suctioning or lift them safely or assist with your child's self-regulation. Growing our own staff in the North helps with retention, but when there is an insistence that available programs such as the Alaska Highway Consortium on Teacher Education run at full capacity and the program is canceled for a year or threatened completely, the impacts are devastating. Further conversation is needed on supports and strategies to grow teachers for the North, including online programs. The newly announced UBC program is a start, but it does not address the complete need. The funding formula review has started to address some of our needs, but work remains. Speaking to the situation of 101 School highlights our equity challenges. The building is deemed critical. 2 years ago, we met with the community to talk about their needs. A project proposal was sent to the ministry and we wait. To quote the PAC president, we don't need a glass palace like the new schools in town. We need more room though, so we can keep our kids closer to home and give them more educational opportunities. Current enrollment is 60 students, but there are 21 children going out of the community to school because of the state of the school and the lack of what can be done within that school. A community survey indicated these students would stay in 101 if things changed. Applied design and skill technologies are difficult to run because of space. We arrange for bus trips into town for those students to use facilities in town where they can do ADST, but a snowstorm comes and their trip to town gets canceled. This is an ELL community, and preschool programs such as Ready, Set, Learn are essential. Right now, these take place in an old community hall that we use as a gym, and the students then don't have access to gym time. Specialists work with kids in the hallways. Public health clinics also happen in the hallways. Imagine being a child getting a dental check while a class files by to the gym when you were already scared about somebody in your mouth.
Can you wrap it up? You're past your 5 minutes.
Okay. In this community, there's a 1.5 hour bus ride to town. Yes, we choose to live in the north, but this doesn't mean we deserve less. Our northern community contributes substantially to the economy of this province. Thank you. I was very nervous.
You did great. Thank you. Okay, so I'll now open it up to questions from the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Just going all the way back to Maria's presentation, I'm hoping that I misheard what you said, but I wanted clarity around the 400% increase in food programs that are required. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, that was the demand in food vouchers that we needed to provide for families. So, for instance, there's a program that we partner with our community schools called Backpack Buddies, I believe, where kids that don't have food security at home are able to just grab a backpack and have a couple meals that they can have later in the day. And it's supposed to be very subtle. And those types of programs that we usually provide kids, you know, if we're going to offer lunch, we always give it away for free for kids that don't have enough money during school. So during the time that kids missed school, or during the time where there was only 50% enrollment last year during COVID, we saw a 400% increase in demand for needs for those types of vouchers.
And so how is that currently funded? Is it funded through the schools? I know in my riding there are a number of backpack programs that are funded through Rotary and things like that. Are you actually funding that yourself? And could you give more clarity around the 400%? In other words, is it one child that there's now 4, or is there 100 and now 400 children?
I would assume that it's in the hundreds. And the data came to me from my lovely staff, and I can definitely get more information for you about that. But I do know that where we were able to handle it last year was part of the COVID support money that we were given. Quite a substantial amount of that money that was supposed to go towards food went towards food and was completely used up on exactly that type of program. So basically, we were able to cover it last year with the COVID support money that was targeted for that. But in future years, if we're seeing food shortage, so if the economic impacts on those families remains such that those same families are further into poverty, we are jumping to the conclusion that we are going to see an increased demand for food ongoingly that will not be covered by the COVID support.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
Thanks very much, Maria. Just the other day, I was dealing with the local food bank, and I know that things have changed dramatically in the area that I'm from. Is there any programs from the food bank that are accessible to the school districts in the Sunshine Coast? And I have no idea how many there are, but I know that the uptick in donations and use has gone up significantly, like across British Columbia.
Yeah. So our community is quite tightly knit and sort of a smaller town, and we have something called the Sunshine Coast Community Services Society, which is an umbrella organization that looks after a number of programs, the food bank being one of them. And the access to the food bank is where people access that is quite close to the central location of where we do live. And I do know that families, in terms of finding out how to access food bank supports, I know that they're in dire need as well in our community since COVID started. And because I used to work there, so I'm still kind of dialed. And I don't know if there's necessarily a collaboration between our school district and the food bank. Usually we raise food bank funds or food for the food bank for things like Christmas. But I don't think that there is food bank support coming to youth through the school. We try and handle the families through the youth that we can have access to kind of offset that and handle what the youth is telling us they need. And then I'm sure adults are accessing the food banks as well for those hours that kids are not in school.
Okay.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Helen. You used a word that I hadn't heard yet today, retention. How big of a problem is that for your school district?
It is a problem. It sort of seems to come in waves, but there was a number of jobs that opened up in the South 2 years ago, and we lost a whole middle generation. I call them a middle generation of teachers. And although we've managed to bring new ones in, and we've reduced our number of teachers on letter of permission right now to 5, it was as high as 18, keeping those people is what is really hard work, especially when we recruit substantially from out of province. Most times we get 2, maybe 3 years out of people, but that's with a lot of investment to get them to come.
Just a little follow-up. Is there any hindrance to the actual students, like for their learning, for the curriculum with this retention issue?
Yes, there is, because we often end up recruiting from outside of the province, and then we end up with teachers coming that don't have knowledge of BC curriculum, and it takes work to plug those holes for them. Some of the online supports for teachers are helpful, but when you talk about, we've had instances where we've recruited teachers to come to some of our rural schools, which are very complex to teach in. Small, multiple grades in a classroom, they come and they take one look at what they've committed to and they turn around and leave. And in those rural schools, that's where the retention issue is really more difficult. We're very lucky if we get people to stay beyond 2 years. We need some programs and we need some support to grow people that are really familiar with those communities and willing to stay. And we've managed to do that. We have a few examples of that with people that went through the ACOTE training program and are now teaching in those rural schools. But it's a very different assignment, and so it needs to be looked at in multiple ways to support people to want to stay in those places.
Good, thank you.
Ben.
Yeah, thanks very much, Helen. Further to my colleague's question about retention, is there any systems or any incentives put in place to attract young graduating or graduating teachers into your district, either through incentives such as student loan forgiveness or anything like that? Is there anything in place like we have for some of the medical community that...
No, there isn't. In our presentation to the standing committee last year, we asked that you consider a forgivable loan program like we have happening in Alberta. We have local kids that went away to school and trained to be teachers that are not coming back to our community that trained in Alberta because they can have their whole educational program paid for if they go back and work in a school or in certain communities for a length of time. And for some reason, Grand Prairie is on that list. And that's a town. How do we compete with offering 101 in that kind of situation? We do have in some of our rural schools teacherages, and we provide rent, which is an attraction to some people, but teacherages are not something that the Ministry of Education funds. That's something that we take on as a district, and we work really hard to make those teacherages as attractive as possible so that housing is an incentive for people to stay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I have one. If Lauren, did I see you? No? Sorry. Okay, I have one, and I think Chris and Tim kind of came at the same issue from, I think you did, from maybe a different perspective. And Chris, I was struck by your comment, build spaces for kids, not fit kids into spaces, or I'm paraphrasing. And Tim, you were talking about the need for a vulnerable student plan. And I wonder if you could elaborate a bit. Like, Chris, on what it would look like to build the space to fit the student, and does that relate to a vulnerable student plan?
Well, I think one of the biggest considerations is when you look at a building that's 70 years old, it was built for an entirely different kind of educational experience. And what we have now with the revised curriculum, the spaces do not afford that same kind of flexibility that we want to see. And when you're looking at a building that's over 70 years old, I mean, I was looking at the pictures of it from the time it was built, and talking about Mount Baker, and some of the interesting old cars, et cetera, that were around at that point in time. And some of the first grads out of that school are now in their late 80s. So that kind of puts it into a perspective as to how old this building is. And the annual facilities grant, we keep pouring money into it over and over again. And at some point in time, this whole thing is just going to come down. I mean, we have to have facilities that are safe for students and for our staffs to work in, and they have to be flexible. Like the Mount Baker one, for example, Mount Baker Secondary, it has an Indigenous Learning Center in it, which is unique. And if we look at building a new building, it's not even part of the template that comes out from the ministry. So when you look at that, and then you look at the spaces that other special education demands are, we need to do a serious revamp. And we are encouraging the ministry and your committee to take a look at that in a hard way, because it has to dovetail with what we're saying about the revised BC curriculum.
Thank you.
And I think just to follow up on Trustee John's point, I think schools have become much more than just where students go to learn. We heard about the meals programs that are being offered. Schools right now, for a lot of students, are also before and after school care centers. So we're quickly running out of our space and buildings to be able to provide these wraparound supports that we need for students and for families. So I think there is work that needs to be done on our current facilities. And then, as Trustee John said, ensuring that when new buildings are designed, that they take all of that into consideration.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions,
back to school district number 60. Are you in the queue for building replacement? Like, have you had an evaluation done?
We have, and we put in for 101, we put in a project proposal, but we really haven't heard anything back. And our initial work with this community was 2 years ago. So they're kind of losing patience with us a little bit. I know the ministry's been really busy. We're very excited because we do have in their sort of hour and a half away sister community school a new gym going in because that school didn't have a gym. But 101's situation is quite urgent.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I am not seeing any other hands asking to ask questions. So with that, I will thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for your commitment to your schools and to your communities. And as an urban MLA, you've given me quite a bit of insight into what your challenges are. You were very eloquent about it. So thank you very much. And we'll say goodbye.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now we'll recess until 3:40. Convene the meeting. And welcome to our presenters. Our next presenter is Tracy Humphreys, BC Ed Access Society.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. Just give me a moment and I'll get right into it. So I'm Tracy Humphreys, and I'm speaking from the stolen lands of the Lekwungen peoples, specifically the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. I'm a settler with roots in the UK and Germany, and I'm a white middle-aged woman with reddish shoulder-length hair and glasses, wearing an orange shirt and black over-the-ear headphones. And don't mind my laundry pile behind me, but this is, pandemic living sometimes. I am a disabled mom of 3 amazing kids with disabilities, 2 of them still in K-12. And I'm the executive director of BC Ed Access, which was founded in 2014 to connect parents and guardians of children and youth with disabilities and accessibility needs to share information, support one another, and to learn about human rights and the education system. So we're a volunteer-run organization. We serve families all over BC with kids in all types of schooling, with all types of disabilities. And we have a parent Facebook group community that has grown at this point to about 4,000 community members. And because the education system is so complex, we actually hired a researcher and policy analyst through the Canada Summer Jobs Program this year. Using parent concerns that were cited over the years, combined with a quick survey earlier this month, we're creating a written submission for this committee that will outline the top changes parents are looking for to create a more inclusive education system. And I'm here to ask you today to invest in a significant way in K-12 education, which is still experiencing budget cuts every year. On the table were approximately $100 million in cuts among the 60 school districts for the 2021-22 school year, many of those targeting inclusive education, and there's more cuts on the table for next school year. Limited time means I'll just give you a couple of examples of what parents are looking for. So first, please release the updated inclusive education policy manual. This would be a low to no cost effort because we, among other groups, are able to meaningfully engage with the Ministry of Education in reviewing the current manual, and we understand the majority of the work is now complete. So school districts currently use a very outdated policy, and we're interested in seeing stronger rights-based language, and we'd like to see this in place, especially when childcare moves to the Ministry of Education to ensure a strong, inclusive framework is already present. Second, an individual education plan, or an IEP, is a student-centered living document created by the parents, student, and school team to identify learning goals, describe the services and adaptations to the environment, teaching methods, and how to achieve those goals. And in 2011, the Office of the Auditor General reported on the first phase of an audit of school district accountability for the effectiveness of special education services. And this report said, currently the best information on student needs is in individual education plans. So the province does a compliance audit, but we need accountability for student outcomes. The only measure of student achievement right now is graduation rates, which have not increased measurably in the last 3 years for students with disabilities, ranging between 60 to 75%, compared to between 81 and 90% for non-disabled students. We need to know sooner whether the money and effort being put into inclusive education is helping disabled students be successful. Waiting until graduation is far too late. So we're asking that you audit IEPs annually for student outcomes. And I also want to talk about mental health, because while our focus is education advocacy, it's become increasingly necessary for BC Ed Access to participate in discussions locally, provincially, and Canada-wide about child and youth mental health, because it has such a huge impact on learning. And we need actual mental health services for all, both in schools and out, and in particular for disabled children and youth. One thing we've learned so far from the pandemic is that more kids are struggling, and for those who were already struggling, it has gotten worse. It's really highlighted the gaps in services for children and youth, but most especially for those who also have a disability diagnosis. There are very few counselors, psychologists, or psychiatrists who are actually trained to work with disabled children and youth who need mental health support. And significant funding has come through from the federal government and also committed by the province, but it's our understanding that none of it will be specifically targeted to address the mental health needs of children and youth with dual diagnoses in schools. We need accountability for these funds and for them to actually support all students, not just some. So the Ministry of Education says the purpose of the BC school system is to enable students to develop their individual potential and to acquire the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to contribute to a healthy society and a prosperous and sustainable economy. In practice, the system, though, creates barriers that disabled students have to overcome to develop their potential. And if the government is committed to a BC that includes all, then you need to commit to a significant increase in education funding and make changes recommended by all who are speaking to this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. And now we'll hear from Cindy Daglish.
Hi, everyone. I am presenting this to you from the stolen lands of the Coast Salish, Semiahmoo, Katzie, Tsawwassen, Stolo, and Kwantlen peoples. My pronouns are she, her. This is my fourth time speaking to the Select Standing Committee on Finance. I want to start with my concern on the efficacy of the Select Standing Committee and its ability to inform positive change within government. I've yet to see traction on the calls to action shared with the committee from myself or other advocates for children with disabilities and their families. My first ask is that each of you personally champion calls to action that are presented to you by myself, Tracy Humphreys, or Cynthia Lockery, or any other advocates that work so hard to advocate for children. I will be reaching out to you individually to follow up. As always, I'm here in support of education and better funding for the entire K-12 system. We have a ministry that seems willing to listen, but they do not have the bandwidth to act with any urgency for what are deemed urgent issues. Our K-12 education system includes educators, education assistants, administrators, boards, unions, and our government staff that enact programs and policies that support the education system. At this current pace, little is getting done, and it's not from a lack of will or desire, but a lack of bandwidth. There are many unfilled positions in the Ministry of Education, and even when filled, the staffing is not adequate to complete the work plans. My first financial ask is to support the Ministry of Education by increasing the resources to complete their work plans, including the work on getting standards of practice for education assistants, so very important, as well as the inclusive education manual that Tracy spoke of earlier. As your responsibility indicates, you are on this committee to support the financial well-being of our province. When we do not support our children proactively and adequately, we pay dearly, both financially and socially, when these children become adults. We see it in the numbers around mental health supports, poverty, addiction, and incarceration. Many because we didn't support these adults as children with adequate services during their formative years. It easily costs our province 10 times the amount in social services, if not more, to support these adults than it would if we just supported these students proactively. Well, what does this support look like? Assessments for every student that requires one. We have long wait lists for assessments within our education system, which impedes a student's ability to get the support they need in a timely fashion. When numerous administrators throughout this province state they are told they need to prioritize students needing assessment and max out how many students they have on a wait list. In other words, they could have 100 students that need an assessment, but they're told your wait list can only have 10. We have a problem. Every student that is showing need for an assessment should be getting one in that same calendar year. It's not uncommon to hear students are identified as struggling by grade 1 and not receiving assessments until grade 7. This is no doubt by design and because of budget constraints. This is where you come in. These budget constraints need to change. We need to remove the growing inconsistencies district to district. The support needs to be targeted and the responsibility lie with government to ensure our children are receiving their legal right to an accessible and equitable education. What else does this support look like? We need more resources to support the findings of the assessments, either smaller class sizes or well-trained education assistants in every class. We also need more school counselors to support the mental health of our students, even those without an assessment. We need more speech and language pathologists in the schools. 10 to 15 minutes with a student once a month, not cutting it. We need more specific student resources to meet the student's specific needs. I understand COVID has put a wrench in many things, but it cannot become the excuse for not supporting our children. We can't do the bare minimum. In fact, we already don't do the bare minimum to ensure each student is receiving their equitable education. If we truly believe that education is supposed to be the great equalizer, regardless of the circumstances in the home, we do a poor job showing it. I know we have the highest funding ever, but it doesn't matter. It's not adequate, and it's not even close in line with other provinces. But I don't want to look at other provinces for a benchmark. I want our province to lead and do right by our children. It's time to invest in our future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Cindy. And finally, we'll hear from Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Lockery. I'm mother of 2 diverse learners in Cowichan Valley on the unceded territory of Cowichan Tribes First Nations. I have 1 student who's in public education, and I have a second student who I've had to pull for her own safety and her mental health out of public education and put her into the private system, not because I won the lottery, but because it was necessary due to lack of supports. I'm also the co-chair of Parents for Inclusive Education. Parents for Inclusive Education is a committee that was formed by parents in School District 79 because we're struggling. Our kids are experiencing trauma and families are in crisis. You'll find out that there's Parents for Inclusive Education sprung up across BC this school year in Surrey, Kelowna, and other school districts. So that should tell you something about what's happening in our schools, that parents are needing to create yet another group when we're already stretched. So this is my 4th time presenting. Every year we hear about the crisis, and every year when the budget comes out, it's like the crisis isn't existing. And we're putting Band-Aids on it. And the reality is our kids are struggling greatly. I'll give you an example of 1 child. I have a child with autism designation. Took us almost 2 years on a wait list before we had to give up and fork out $3,000 for a private assessment, because without that golden nugget of an autism, he wasn't getting the support he needs, although all of his needs were obvious. Last year, we were promised in the BC government's Restart Plan, students with disabilities, diverse abilities, and those who require additional supports will have access to and receive the same supports and services they had prior to the pandemic. That was a promise by the province of BC that I guarantee you did not happen in any school anywhere in BC. We all saw cuts, 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 cuts. Our school of 450 kids went from 3 EAs to 2 for 450 kids, with 3 kids in grade 3 alone who require one-on-one support. Forget about all the other kids with supports. Last year, my son had meltdowns every day of the week because he had no support. He was left to try to navigate all these new restrictions and was in crisis. It was only through a month of doing nothing but advocating, bringing in provincial organizations. I'm a strong advocate that we were able to get 1 more educational system back. But here's what happens. We have to wait till a child's in trauma to get help. They have to be in severe trauma. And even then, they don't always get help. And then we make these announcements about mental health funding, but we allow the trauma to be created. We wait until the trauma results in mental health issues, and then we dress it at the end, which, as Cindy mentioned, is much more expensive than if we could just support these diverse learners at the beginning so that the trauma is not inflicted. And that trauma, it has a ripple effect. Teachers, administrators, the other children are being inflicted upon with what's happening, and families across BCs are in crisis. Through my Parents for Inclusive Education Committee, every week I get phone calls and messages from parents who are in crisis, whose kids are not getting supports. We've had numerous meetings with our school district, very open, and they've said our hands are tied. We only have so much money and the needs are here and the funding's here. And we want to help your kids, but there's nothing more we can do. So we've talked to the Ministry of Education and they've said, that's all the money we have. Go back to your school district. So parents are in this loop. And meanwhile, kids are spiraling out of control. We're having trauma. Families are going into crisis and no one's there to help us. So my ask to this committee is simple. Please listen to what we're saying. This is our 4th year saying it. I'll be back next year, but I'm hoping that my son doesn't have to have another year of trauma and that I have to pull my kid out of public education to ensure their safety. Also, I ask you to really look at how funding is earmarked for kids with disabilities. Right now, school districts have funding earmarked for Indigenous students and Indigenous learning, and it's safeguarded. That is not the case with our kids' funding. It goes into a big pot of money and can be used if we need to buy more hand sanitizer. And finally, please keep your commitment to support kids with special needs, because last year's promise was broken and none of us have the bandwidth to go through another school year like we went through last year. Because of the trauma that was inflicted.
Thank you, Cynthia. So I will, we now have roughly 15 minutes for questions from the committee.
Thanks, Chair. I'll give it a go. I think I can certainly sense the frustration. I am currently working with one of my constituents who is having a child assessed for autism. So, Cynthia, I think I can appreciate what you're saying. It seems to me that the problem is it's throughout a couple of different ministries, because with the situation that I'm working with, it's Interior Health. The number that you quoted is $3,000. They want the child assessed by their doctor, who obviously is not the doctor that the child was originally assessed by in the community. So I think the $3,000 is exactly what I was told by the constituent. So I can appreciate the cost and the frustration. But I think it's certainly more, I think it's multi-ministries that we need to convey this message to. It's not really a question, it's more of a statement, but I can appreciate your frustration, and certainly I'll do my best to, be part of that message.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Cindy, with your comments about assessment and the lag of time that's there, have you done the kind of legwork maybe to find out what other districts have as benchmarks that are there? Like, is it rampant everywhere, or is it just Surrey-centric or Metro Vancouver-centric, or whatever the case may be?
This is a provincial issue, not a Surrey issue. Pretty much everything I've stated today is around the province and not just specific to Surrey. Surrey, of course, does have its own issues because of the general size of it. But I know in just doing some of the research in talking to different districts, this is not uncommon throughout the province.
Okay, so just to follow up, there's not a school district that's out there that does it in 30 days and another one that does it in 45 days. And okay, very good. Thank you.
No.
I got the head nods. I got that one.
The head negative nods.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could jump in on that because I think I could provide you a little more information there. They're actually, you know, the province does kind of keep track of wait times a little bit provincially and how that's going. And it looks to be, you know, 9 months to almost 2 years right now for most people. And in the bigger districts, they actually have, you know, potentially more capacity because they're more funded generally just because they have so many students. Rurally, it can be really, really challenging to get an assessment because there just isn't even anyone working in that area who can provide it. So on balance, it's pretty bad everywhere.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And I will also add that our child, we've been told in our district that our child will never get an assessment, even though we have every year letters from developmental pediatricians for needing a psych ed assessment. And going back to the money, that's now another $3,600 to get a private assessment that every doctor has told us we need it. But the school district said in Cowichan, we only do 100 a year. And they have to do anybody in grade 12 first who's already had it done. So it really minimizes how many they can get done. So it means kids can go through the whole school career needing a psych ed assessment. And unless you can fork out lots of money, your kid's not getting it, which means we wait till graduation, as Tracy said earlier, to find out why they didn't graduate.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that might be helpful for you if you're interested in looking at this as a committee further. The Select Standing Committee on, I was trying to remember the name, Children and Youth with Special Needs, I think it was called, a couple of years ago did a big sort of inquiry around services for, you know, children and youth with disabilities, and lots of people came and testified, and there's a ton of information there about assessment if you're interested in looking further.
Lauren.
Just a follow-up question, I guess to you, Cynthia, only because I'm a little bit familiar with your situation. What is the holdup with the assessments? Is it too many kids? Is it lack of staff? I mean, I guess it would be easy to say yes to that. I think one of you mentioned that there are many positions open, but these assessments obviously are coming from doctors, and it appears to me that perhaps there's a list of doctors that can approve these assessments, and I guess I'm wondering what is the specific issue there in getting these assessments. In my case, it's 2 years minimum to get the assessment done on a child who is roughly 14 years old, I think, and so obviously by the time we get this kid assessed, it's going to be 16. So what is the holdup there?
It's interesting because you have the public funded system, and you're right, it's a bottleneck of all of these kids coming through, and the under 6 require a more lengthy assessment than the over 6, and different practitioners involved. And then because the bottleneck has gotten so bad, there's now a charity that is funding private assessments. Tracy, I can't remember the name of the charity right now. And this charity is now funding private assessment, which is a new thing. So now that's taken some of the people out of the public into the private, and now that's clogged. And now it's over a year for a private. So from what I understand, it's just there's not enough funding to hire more practitioners to do this, and also to expand who can do these assessments.
And we're not training enough people to do them. Like the people who know how are retiring, and we are not replacing them. That's the key piece of information.
And as you stated earlier, that this could be across different ministries, right there, not having enough in the labor workforce would need to fall under the Ministry of Labor, just like standards of education or education assistance should also have a tie-in with the Ministry of Labor. But they're not at the table, and the left arm's not talking to the right arm about these different things. Of course, Ministry of Advanced Ed should also be part and parcel of these conversations, and they're not. They're just not at the table at all. And the charity I believe Cynthia was speaking about is Variety.
Yeah, that certainly is consistent with my situation as well. The Variety Club hopefully will help this family. But again, and somebody pointed out just now that it's a matter of who can do these assessments, because this family actually has an assessment, but it's not acceptable to the ministry. And so you're back to either waiting for, I believe it's called INAC or IMAC, I'm not sure, but that would be the Interior agency. And then, of course, they have a list of people that can provide that assessment. So it would seem to me that any physician should be able to do that, perhaps in the province. Now, I'm a complete layman, so, but I do appreciate the conversation. It's certainly important. Thank you.
And I will add that without that assessment, without that diagnosis, now you get into the issue of schools where they don't get the support, because a lot of times the support is based on the assessment, but not needs. A child can have clear needs, but without the assessment, which comes with, for autism, $20,000 for a school district, they don't get the support. So you can see how that we call it the golden nugget for a reason, because we need that for our kids to get support. And when you're 16 years old before you get that diagnosis, that means you're 16 before you get the support you need in the education system. And the amount of educational assistance and supports that school districts are budgeted for is based on those dollars that those kids bring in based on their assessments. So it really does go all the way down the line, impacting these children. They don't have a chance.
Thank you. And then Harwinder has a question, so let's hear from her.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenters. I really appreciate all of you shedding the light and importance of how important it is to invest early on, which can save us a lot more money. And it shouldn't be about money when it's about our children. From my knowledge, I know the government gives money to school districts, and every school district, they manage their funds differently. And I think one of you highlighted how they have the money, there is safeguard for Indigenous education. Would it be the change in mandate, certain type of mandate would help, like this much money should be saved in addition to what three of you suggested, that there need to be more funding? And have you heard about any school district that has been the champion or are trying to move into that direction to take the lead to save this a designated amount of money to support these children? Any conversation that I know I saw head nods earlier, but I wonder if there is any school district that may who is talking about it or taking and thinking to take this action, and how can, like, would mandate change help, or what can we advocate for? So thank you.
I don't want to jump ahead of other people. I'm sure people have lots of ideas. It's a really complicated question to ask, because the direction of the Ministry of Education through the funding model review, which happened a couple of years ago, and which we were involved in, really happy to be involved in, was more in the direction of needs-based funding, and so less in the direction of individualized funding. But what we're really talking about is accountability, right? And I don't mean to denigrate school districts in any way. I know they work very hard and they do the best that they can with what they have available. I think it's really challenging for them because there's less and less every year. But no one that I can think of is doing what you're suggesting. And the best things that I have seen them doing recently is starting to have conversations that are specific to students with disabilities. Some districts have committees now, where they talk about inclusive education, and they're looking long-term at how to move forward. But some of, the best thing that the province can do is set accountability standards for students with disabilities. There's really nothing right now, like I said, just graduation rates. That's the only thing that tells us how our students are doing. And so anything in addition to that, looks along the way would be really, really helpful.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate the answer. And I often, we hear this very common phrase when we're investing, it's taken as spending. And I always see it investing in children or youth or whether social programs is the best investment where you see the returns later and you save a lot more money. And I really appreciate the work all of three of you are doing. And, I appreciate the presentation and giving us this broader in knowledge of the issue and the bottlenecks that are being, faced. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben.
I think actually I got the answer. Tracy, you mentioned we needed greater accountabilities by audit to improve outcomes. And you just said setting the standards for students with disabilities. I guess when I see this, and in my own writing over the years, obviously early diagnosis before kids are in school, especially autistic children. I guess I'm really wondering if it's more of a health issue, like in the sense that the early assessment, because school is maybe too late and it's not necessarily equipped to deal with it. So I wonder if it's sitting in the right bucket, like whether...
Yeah, we often talk about that assessment, it's kind of strange that most assessments are health, except a few particular ones like psychoeducational assessments are not within the Ministry of Health. And those are really important assessments for teachers to understand how to best educate and support disabled students. But there are even some really simple screening that can be done at kindergarten, grade 1 for, let's say, dyslexia, for example. They're cheap and really easy. And just like, eye screening or hearing screening, we could do a screening for a number of things that would help sort of pick things up in the early years that maybe don't require that bigger assessment yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Megan.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all of the presenters today. I know I had the privilege in my role on school board to meet with many of you and hear many fantastic presentations and submissions that you've made over the time into our school district. So I'd like to thank you for your work. The question that I have is just moving off the conversation with health. What sort of reception has there been to that type of conversation, looking at more integration within the ministries and moving psychoeducational and other assessments? Have you had the opportunity to really dig into that?
I haven't actually ever engaged on that with health. I know that there's significant siloing between ministries, even though, education is like a hub, right? All the child serving ministries in one way or another intersect with education. And there are interministerial protocols that are set up between, with education and all the other ministries so that kind of service is defined. But actually it's another area that needs updating because they're, I think, 7 years out of date right now, most of them. So that would be another thing to talk about. But yeah, mostly it's having those engagements interministerially, like actual conversations and talking about how to best serve kids, and not talking about, well, this is my bucket of money and this is your bucket of money, let's just figure out the best way to do this that cuts through the timeline. And I'm sorry, Cynthia and Cindy, I don't mean to do all the talking here.
Well, I was going to add that there's two other pieces. Is one, a pediatrician's diagnosis is not always a Ministry of Education diagnosis. So parents are really struggling with this piece. The pediatrician may say the child has this, and this, and needs these supports, but the ministry, this is the siloing, has a totally different type of designations or that needs to be done. So parents are left with this great sense of relief because of what the pediatrician says, only to hit a wall with the Ministry of Education. And in my work, I was at the community conversations the Ministry of Health had just days before COVID hit. And I had this conversation with Ministry of Health staff and they laughed. and said, oh, we do not speak to each other and do not expect us to speak to each other, because that's a whole silo that will take years to be broken down. So you can see where parents are frustrated when your pediatrician tells you something and it doesn't actually mean anything to just the health world, but it doesn't cross into the education world. But yet it's the same child.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And I think with that, we have some more presentations this afternoon, and I think with that, we have to wrap it up for now. I think we've certainly heard your frustration and your commitment to your children. And there's a number of things that I think we would want to pursue as a committee and beyond as a committee. I think this is the beginning of a much bigger conversation about silos and about the health of our children and making sure that our children get the best education possible. So thank you. It was hard to hear, but it was important to hear. So thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. So we'll move right into the last presentations. And the next presenter is Tammy Murphy, QP 728, Surrey School Board District Support Staff. So Tammy, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Tammy Murphy. I'm an education assistant and the president of QP 728, the union representing more than 5,000 support workers in Surrey's public schools. We support students in classrooms, keep schools clean and healthy, ensure grounds and facilities are maintained, and provide administrative support and ensure that students are safely transported to and from school. Our members work on the traditional unceded territories of the Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Kwantlen First Nations. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed a great deal of strain on those working in the public school systems, especially sectors like K-12 that have experienced years of underfunding in the past. We want to speak to you today about some of the necessary funding increases needed to ensure our schools and those who work in them can meet the needs of the children and families. A legacy of past funding shortfalls has negatively affected mental health programs and supports. Over 18 months of the pandemic has both triggered mental health conditions and made existing conditions worse. This pattern has been felt across systems and acutely experienced by those serving as education assistants, youth care workers, and Indigenous support workers. In our district alone, approximately 10,000 students have a defined complex need, and approximately twice that number of students need assistance but don't have designations. This constitutes to around 43% of Surrey's nearly 70,000 students. There are approximately 2,500 support staff trying to service this community of need. You do the math. It means we are far from providing one-on-one support to students who need it. And this legacy of underfunding is being felt by those on the front line and the students who we serve. Our recommendation is that budget 2022 include increased funding levels for mental health programs, support workers, and more training spaces and bursaries for education assistants and Indigenous support workers. A key lesson for the pandemic is the value of cleaning and custodial work. Not only was last year's increase of daytime custodians vital to the stop of the spread of COVID-19, the increased sanitation and cleaning contributed to other positive health outcomes by limiting the spread of viruses that are common to school environments. Preventing schools from being vectors of transmissions for illnesses like influenza, colds, and strep throats. This protects our most vulnerable citizens, reduces the amount of time staff and students miss due to illness, and protects the overall health of communities. QP has repeatedly raised the concerns about limited daytime hours for custodians, and that has evolved because of systems of underfunding. In Surrey, 2 elementary schools have daytime custodians. That means during the day, there is no regular sanitation, high-touch cleaning, no one to deal with maintenance issues, and no one to deal with spills, accidents, or bodily fluids at 102 of Surrey's 125 schools. We recommend that the budget 2022 provides sufficient funding for daytime custodial staff at all school sites, that this be a permanent and ongoing element of the K-12 funding model. CUPE members in Surrey schools were among many CUPE workers who provided critical childcare services during the pandemic. Our members know firsthand that public education systems can make a substantial contribution to filling BC's tremendous need for childcare spaces. We commend the BC government for the creation of the seamless day model sites, 20 of them, and we believe this represents a strong path forward. While the new sites are an excellent start, much more can be done, especially with new federal funding. There is a number of benefits to providing childcare, especially before and after school care through school systems. Public education has a ready-made infrastructure of facilities. One unique advantage is the human resources available in schools. The K-12 system has thousands of EAs and other education workers who are currently underemployed at less than 6 hours per day, and who could easily and enthusiastically be mobilized to provide high quality before and after school care in British Columbia. To support the government's leadership in the creation of true public systems and affordable childcare, Budget 2022 should include the necessary investments to enable mass expansions of childcare services in the public schools. Education is a key part of coming out of this pandemic stronger. And for these recommendations, along with QPBC's recommendations for increased funding to our post-secondary systems, are a key strategy to securing BC's future and prosperity. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Tammy. I'll now open it up for questions from the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Tammy, with regards to the EAs that you spoke about increasing their hours, what impact would that have?
That would have a huge impact for social systems, for members. We're looking at right now increasing through childcare, which of course would be beneficial to society as a whole, as we're so underfunded and so there's just no spaces available. It's a natural way of moving forward. And as I say, we've done it in the past. We did it at the beginning of the pandemic. EAs, childcare workers, they all came in and did it. And with 6 hours, I mean, we're still in poverty level when you're looking at wages. And as I say, there's benefits all around the board. There's no losing by increasing the hours and allowing it for childcare.
And I think I'm just going to ask the most rhetorical question I can ask for the whole day. Are the EAs ready to take on the extra hours?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, it looks like you covered all the bases. Woohoo! Okay, thank you for your time. And thank you for giving the CUPE perspective on education. It's really important. Really important.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. And now we'll turn to Jennifer Edwards, who is with For Our Kids. And now we'll turn to Jennifer Edwards For Our Kids.
Hi, good afternoon. Our ask is that the next BC budget increase the line item for electric school buses so that all of the new school bus purchases are electric. Thank you so much for your time today. I would like to acknowledge that I live on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded Indigenous territories of the Squamish First Nations. I'm joining you on behalf of For Our Kids. We are a network of parents across Canada volunteering our time to find solutions to the climate crisis. My oldest child attends elementary school on the Sunshine Coast. School bus services are vital to our community, providing transport for students living beyond walking distance from the school. I'm requesting that BC's budget increase the line item for electric school buses so that 100% of the buses are all electric. I was really excited to hear that the province has already agreed to fund electric school buses. However, there's an urgent need for the transition to happen much faster and move completely away from diesel buses. The two main problems with diesel buses are environmental and health related. The latest IPC report paints a bleak future unless more is done by every level of the government to decrease emissions. Heat domes, unprecedented forest fires, and poor air quality have confirmed that climate change is here. It's deadly and will only get worse for our children. Climate impacts will also cost us billions of dollars. Yet the average diesel school bus will emit 20 tons of greenhouse gases each year. By investing in climate solutions now, it will save us money in the long run. Traditional diesel school buses also affect the health of kids and drivers. Environment Canada recognizes that there are risks with diesel school buses that produce pollutants like nitrous oxides and fine particulate matter. These pollutants can build up in the bus cabin and around the school stops and are particularly harmful to the developing lungs of children. This also puts the health of bus drivers at risk with pollutants in diesel exhaust that are proven to cause lung cancer, as well as lung and heart disease. Workers with the heaviest and most exposure have been found to have lung cancer and the highest death rates. Electric school buses are a greener and safer alternative. They're now being made by Canadian companies like Lion Electric for delivery around North America to states like Virginia, which have already pledged to go 100% electric with its school bus fleet. Provinces in Canada are already invested in electric school buses. Quebec has committed $250 million over the next 3 years. This target will translate into a reduction of about 800,000 tons in greenhouse gas emissions. BC's school bus acquisition program bought 18 electric school buses last year out of 101 school buses purchased. That means that 83 diesel buses were added to our network. Those new diesel buses will spend over a decade on the road, adding to BC's emissions and to pollution getting into the lungs of BC students. There was recently an announcement by the Canadian Infrastructure Bank for support of 280 electric school buses. This is really encouraging, but we are still seeking more details of the timing of this. How many per year? And how many diesel buses will be purchased in the same time frame? Every new diesel bus bought over the next 10 years will spend 10 years in service, extending the transition until the new buses need to be replaced. Right now, electric buses cost a bit more than twice as much as a new diesel bus. However, the savings are substantial, as lifetime operating costs are about 35% lower than diesel buses. The upfront costs, particularly when the charging infrastructure is factored in, are too high for school districts, and so funding from a higher level is required. Our hope and our request to you is that the new BC budget ensures we get to 100% electric school bus acquisition. Every new diesel bus is a wasted opportunity, and we need to transition to the existing fleet as fast as possible to reduce emissions and protect our kids' health. Being climate leaders will also communicate to our kids that adults are listening. They want a transition to a low carbon world. There's nothing a parent wouldn't do to protect their child, and so I'm asking you to invest in the health and well-being of our children. Thank you, and those are my kids in the background.
And would they like to add something?
Would they like to add anything?
Who should I send? Hey,
go see Daddy.
Turn it off.
Sorry.
Did he say time to go? Okay, well, we better get our questions in a hurry. Ben.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. And, I guess the question that comes up in my mind, the hydrogen fuel cell, the development here in British Columbia by Ballard.
Yes.
And I guess the question about it is, as an alternative source from a clean point of view in terms of the environment, et cetera, I know that Ballard has been selling significant fuel cells into Asia where, the bus manufacturing, et cetera. But it is a homemade product here in British Columbia, and I guess it's current and it's much more. I've actually seen the actual fuel cells compared to Toyota and some of the other ones, and the size of it is very compact, weight, and I've ridden in it, and I can tell you that it's as fast as electric vehicles, which is sometimes maybe too good for bus drivers in the sense it's probably going to scare the kids. But anyways, I just don't think that we should leave that out as an opportunity as part of, opportunities, because, and the other problem is, there's parts of the province where the remoteness doesn't always lend itself to the, the recharging of the fuel cells or the electric buses. So something that we have to think about in terms of some of the long bus rides in some of the rural and remote communities.
Yes.
Lauren.
Thanks for the presentation. It was great to see your kids. I think MLA Rutledge was thinking that we should be playing dinosaur as well, so it was great to see the kids there. Can you enlighten me, I guess, on, it sounds like you've done quite a bit of research. Can you enlighten me how effective electric buses are in colder climates for the north, and certainly maybe those longer trips that we see in some of rural BC?
That's a great question. I don't have the answer offhand because I myself work for the school district, so I work with the early years team. So I'm not an expert, and I'm just here as a parent today. But we could definitely look into that and hand it in with our written submission.
I would certainly appreciate that for sure.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, Jennifer, and thank you for making a pitch for our children's clean, healthy future.
Great.
What a
Thank
great
you so
way
much.
what a great way to end a long day. It's delightful. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
I'll take a motion to adjourn, please. One motion to adjourn. All in favor? Motion passed.